"438 Days at Sea." It was a sunny morning on January 30th, 2014, when two islanders of Ebon Atoll stumbled upon a sight they would never forget. A man, naked and clutching a knife, appeared out of the ocean like a phantom from a bygone era. His wild hair and beard framed a face etched with exhaustion and relief. He spoke no English, only Spanish, a language foreign to the locals, but his eyes conveyed a simple truth. He had survived the impossible. This was José Salvador Alvarenga, a man who had just emerged from one of the most harrowing tales of survival ever recorded. Alvarenga's journey began over 14 months earlier, on November 17, 2012, off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico. An experienced fisherman, Alvarenga was no stranger to the sea's temperament. That day, however, he and his novice companion, 23-year-old Ezequiel Córdoba, faced a storm that would change their lives forever. The small fiberglass boat they sailed, a mere 25 feet in length, was no match for the violent tempest that stripped them of power and direction, leaving them to drift aimlessly into the vastness of the Pacific. Days turned into weeks, and the unforgiving ocean became both their prison and sustenance. With limited supplies and no hope of rescue, they scavenged whatever the ocean offered. Alvarenga's hands became his lifeline. He caught fish with his bare hands, captured birds for their precious blood, and even ate raw sea turtles. But as the days wore on, Córdoba's resolve crumbled. Malnourished and sick, he succumbed to the elements. The body became both a haunting reminder of Alvarenga's own mortality and a twisted source of companionship. For 6 days, he conversed with the lifeless form of his friend, his sanity teetering on the brink. Eventually, the recognition that he was losing his grip on reality forced him to let go, casting Córdoba's body into the sea. The months that followed were a blur of desperation and faith. Alvarenga clung to his belief in God, his optimism the only shield against the crushing isolation. He prayed, sang hymns, and counted the phases of the moon, his only measure of time. He spotted cargo ships in the distance, but they never spotted him, leaving him to drift, lost but not defeated. After 438 days at sea, Alvarenga finally saw land. The sight of mountains on the horizon stirred the last remnants of his strength. Abandoning his boat, he swam towards what he later learned was one of the Marshall Islands. He collapsed, a man broken but alive, his odyssey over. The world marveled at Alvarenga's survival, but skepticism quickly followed his extraordinary tale. How could a man survive 438 days at sea, alone in a small rudderless boat? Critics questioned the plausibility of his account, from avoiding scurvy to staying hydrated and sane in the vast, merciless Pacific. Investigators and journalists scrutinized his story, searching for inconsistencies. Yet, oceanographers and experts provided support, noting that the ocean currents and Alvarenga's drift pattern aligned with his account. A polygraph test further bolstered his credibility, though doubts persisted, with some suggesting he may have exaggerated or misremembered parts of his ordeal. Today, he lives quietly in El Salvador, far from the ocean that once held him captive. He carries the memories of those 14 months with him, a man who has seen the edge of oblivion and returned to tell the tale. Ada Blackjack. In 1921, Ada Blackjack, a 23-year-old Inupiat woman, joined an ill-fated expedition to Wrangel Island, a desolate Arctic outpost north of Siberia. Hired as a cook and seamstress, Ada's journey quickly became a harrowing tale of survival. The expedition, organized by Arctic explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson, aimed to claim the island for the British Empire, despite Britain having no actual interest in the territory. Stefansson, who did not accompany the team, sent 4 inexperienced young men with only 6 months' worth of supplies, assuring them that the, quote, friendly Arctic would provide the rest. Ada had doubts about the mission, but needed the promised $50 per month to pay for her son Bennett's tuberculosis treatment. In September 1921, she reluctantly boarded the Silver Wave with the 4 men and a ship's cat, Victoria. For a time, Wrangel Island lived up to Stephenson's promises, but as winter approached, game became scarce, and the rescue ship was forced to turn back. By early 1923, the crew faced starvation, and Lorne Knight had succumbed to scurvy. On January 28th, 3 of the men set out across the ice for help, leaving Ada alone with the dying Knight. They were never seen again. For 6 months, Ada cared for Knight, enduring his frustration as he deteriorated. When he succumbed, she recorded his death in a poignant, broken entry, quote, "He died on June 23rd. I don't know what time." Written by Mrs. Ada B. Jack. Focused on survival, Ada trapped foxes, shot birds, and even constructed a skin boat. She fortified her shelter and prepared for polar bear attacks, showing extraordinary resilience. Ada was finally rescued on August 20th, 1923, nearly 2 years after her arrival. The team found her well prepared, able to survive even longer if necessary. Ada returned to civilization, but shunned the spotlight, insisting she was simply a mother trying to return to her son. She used her earnings, less than promised, to continue Bennett's treatment, but her later years were marked by hardship and poverty. William or Stephenson profited from the expedition's tragic tale, but Ada saw none of that wealth. She died in 1983 at age 85, buried beside the son for whom she had braved the Arctic and survived. Bones in the sand. In the summer of 1940, on a desolate island in the Pacific, a British expedition stumbled upon a chilling discovery: a scattering of human bones, half buried in the coarse sand, lying ominously close to rusted navigation equipment. At first glance, these relics seemed unremarkable, easily dismissed as the remains of an unfortunate man lost to the whims of the ocean. But decades later, modern forensic science would breathe new life into this forgotten find, resurrecting one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, the fate of Amelia Earhart. Earhart, the trailblazing aviator, disappeared in 1937 while attempting to circumnavigate the globe with her navigator, Fred Noonan. The last leg of their journey began in Papua New Guinea, the Lockheed Electra's engines roaring as they ascended into the sky, bound for a small island south of Hawaii. But somewhere over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, Earhart's voice fell silent, her radio cutting out. The world responded swiftly, launching a massive search operation. Thousands of people, 10 ships, and 65 aircraft scoured the seas, their efforts tireless, yet ultimately in vain. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan vanished without a trace, leaving behind only speculation and a trail of rumors that would span generations. Theories about Earhart's fate multiplied in the absence of hard evidence. Some whispered of espionage, believing she'd been captured by the Japanese. Others wove tales of survival, imagining Earhart adopting a new identity, living out her days far from the public eye. Yet, the discovery on Nikumaroro, an isolated island in the Pacific, presented a far more grim possibility. Could it be that Earhart had crashed on this barren land, surviving as a castaway, only to succumb to the merciless elements, or, as some feared, to the island's voracious crabs? This theory gained credibility in recent years thanks to the work of Richard L. Jantz, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Tennessee. In his study, Amelia Earhart and the Nikumaroro Bones, Jantz revisited the skeletal remains discovered in 1940, employing modern forensic techniques to compare them with known measurements of Earhart's body. His findings showed that the bones matched Earhart's dimensions more closely than those of 99% of a large reference sample, challenging the original 1941 analysis that had dismissed the remains as those of a man. Further evidence unearthed in Nikumaroro bolsters the castaway theory. Alongside the bones, researchers uncovered fragments of a woman's shoe, a sextant box similar to the one used by Noonan, and a bottle of Benedictine, a French herbal liqueur. These artifacts paint a vivid picture of a lone survivor, possibly Earhart herself, scraping together an existence on the island, fishing in the shallows, hunting seabirds, and collecting rainwater in the leaves of tropical plants. In the days following her disappearance, numerous distress calls were claimed to have been heard from Earhart's radio by amateur radio operators around the world. Each one was a cry for help, a signal that perhaps she had fought to stay alive, marooned on an island where hope ebbed away with the tides. The mystery of Amelia Earhart's fate remains unsolved, but on Nikamororo, the bones tell a possible story of survival and struggle as a castaway. Tromelin Island castaways. East of Madagascar, in the Indian Ocean, lies a small and largely unremarkable group of islands known as the Scattered Islands. Among them is Tromelin, a barren plateau with little fresh water and harsh weather conditions. Despite its bleak nature, Tromelin Island supported human life for years, though under tragic circumstances. In 1761, the French ship Utile ran aground on reefs near Tromelin Island. The Utile was carrying a crew of around 140 men and 160 Malagasy people who had been illegally taken from Madagascar for slavery. The entire French crew and about 60 of the Malagasy people survived the wreck. Tragically, around 100 Malagasy slaves drowned, locked in the ship's hold. Stranded on the island, the French crew dug a well for drinking water using tools salvaged from the wreck. They survived on their remaining rations, supplemented by seabirds and turtles that nested on the island. Captain Jean de la Fougueux soon succumbed to madness, likely due to the immense pressure and responsibility, as well as the stark, unforgiving environment of Tromelin Island. 2 camps were soon established, one for the French sailors and another for the Malagasy slaves. The ship's first lieutenant assumed command, organizing the construction of a new, smaller vessel from the remnants of the Utile. The makeshift boat, christened Providence, was a fragile shred of hope amidst the desolation. In September 1761, the Providence set sail with the French crew aboard, leaving behind the 60 Malagasy survivors with a solemn promise to return with aid. But when the sailors reached Mauritius and pleaded for a rescue mission, they were met with cold indifference. The demands of war, with Britain exerting pressure in India, left no ships to spare for the forgotten souls of Tromelin. The second-in-command, who had overseen the construction of Providence, continued to advocate for the slaves' rescue. Despite his efforts, the slaves were ultimately forgotten. It wasn't until 1773, 12 years after the wreck, that a passing ship spotted the stranded slaves. Multiple attempts were made to rescue them, but the treacherous reefs thwarted each effort. In a cruel twist, one sailor, attempting to reach the island, was left behind. His fate remains a mystery, though it was said he fashioned a raft and set sail, with a few of the remaining Malagasy survivors, never to be seen again. Finally, in 1776, a ship reached Tromelin Island. By then, most of the slaves had died, but 7 women and a baby had survived. They had managed to keep a fire burning despite the absence of trees and had built a hut from coral stones. The survivors revealed that most of the Malagasy had perished within their first few months as castaways. Taken from the highlands of Madagascar, they had little knowledge of how to find food or shelter near the sea. Remarkably, Tromelin Island, with its harsh conditions, sustained this small group of survivors for 15 years. They were ultimately taken to the island of Mauritius, where they were granted their freedom by the French governor. A history-altering shipwreck. On a fateful day in May 1819, the San Telmo, a 74-gun Spanish warship commanded by Captain Joaquin de Toledo y Parra, embarked from Cadiz, Spain. Little did the crew know, they were sailing into the heart of a potentially history-altering mystery. bound for the distant shores of Peru. The ship was part of a small fleet, known as the South Sea Division, tasked with quelling rebellions in Spain's South American colonies in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. Captain Rosendo Portier, the fleet's commander, harbored a deep sense of foreboding. As he bid farewell to a close friend in Cadiz, he ominously remarked, quote, "Goodbye, Francisquito, probably until eternity." His words would prove eerily prophetic. The journey was fraught with difficulties from the start. One ship, the Alejandro I, had to turn back shortly after crossing the equator due to severe leaks. By September, disaster struck as the remaining vessels approached the icy, treacherous waters of Cape Horn. Violent storms scattered the fleet, and the San Telmo, already in poor condition, suffered critical damage to its rudder. On September 2, 1819, the San Telmo was last seen by its sister ships, struggling against the elements at 62 degrees south latitude. Then it vanished without a trace. For 3 years, Spain waited for news. Finally, in 1822, the 644 men aboard the San Telmo were officially declared dead. But this declaration only marked the beginning of a lasting mystery. Years after the San Telmo disappeared, British naval officers exploring the South Shetland Islands of Antarctica made a startling discovery. On Half Moon Beach of Livingston Island, they found debris that appeared to be from the San Telmo, along with signs of recent human activity. The clue suggested that the San Telmo, crippled but not defeated, had drifted further south than any European ship before it. Not only does this evidence suggest that the crew may have survived, but that they may have been the first people in history to reach Antarctica. If proven, this discovery could rewrite the history books, establishing Spain as the first nation to reach Antarctic shores. While such a finding wouldn't change modern territorial claims, it would be a source of immense national pride for Spain and its navy. Some evidence shows that Antarctica may have been reached even before the San Telmo set sail. Some Maori legends tell of explorers who may have reached the continent as early as the 7th century. This would predate any European expeditions or attempts to reach it by more than a millennium. If neither the Maori nor the crew of the San Telmo reached Antarctica, the most likely candidate would be John Davies, an English sealer whose crew claimed to have landed on the continent in 1820. The ship's logbook supports this, making it the earliest recorded claim. It is hoped that one day, more evidence will come to light regarding whether the crew of the San Telmo or that of another vessel was first to set foot on Antarctica. Until then, the mystery of the San Telmo endures. Could you survive on a desert island for 15 years? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching Dark 5. Like and subscribe to continue exploring the greatest mysteries of this world and beyond.